Hey everyone, and welcome back to ABA Chapter Chat. You know how sometimes it feels like we're drowning in information, trying to figure out what's really important? Well, today we're taking a deep dive into pinpointing in performance management.
It's a core concept in applied behavior analysis.
Yeah.
Helps professionals really target those behaviors and results that are going to make the biggest difference.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at excerpts from Chapter 6 of Performance Management, Changing Behavior that Drives Organizational Effectiveness.
A great book, by the way, packed with insights that can apply to all sorts of settings, from education to business, even therapy.
And that's what we love about ABA, right?
Yeah.
It's all about improving performance no matter what the context.
Absolutely.
So think of pinpointing like this. You're searching for a needle in a haystack, except the needle is that one behavior or result that's going to unlock a whole new level of effectiveness.
Love that analogy.
We're going to unpack some pretty cool tools too, like the ACORN test and the 80-20 principle.
Yeah, those are game changers.
So let's jump right in. Now, when we say pinpointing, what exactly do we mean? I feel like sometimes we use these terms in ABA and assume everyone's on the same page.
It's true. We do sometimes get caught up in the jargon, right? But pinpointing is all about zeroing in on that specific behavior or result that, if changed, will have the most significant positive impact.
Okay, so it's about finding that one thing that's really going to move the needle.
Precisely.
So where do we even begin with this whole pinpointing process? Is there like a roadmap we can follow?
Well, the book emphasizes that the first and most important step is to define the mission.
Mission. So are we talking like a grand statement of purpose, like something you'd see framed on a wall?
Not quite, no. It's more about the fundamental reason a job or an organization exists. The core outcome that everything else revolves around.
Okay, so it's like the heart of the matter, the driving force behind everything we do.
Exactly. Think of it this way. A school's mission is to educate students right. Everything else they do, curriculum, activities, all of it stems from that central purpose.
Got it.
Yeah.
So how does this apply to us in ABA? Like, do we need to be writing mission statements for our therapy sessions?
It's not necessarily about writing formal mission statements, but having that clear understanding of the purpose behind our work. For instance, if you're working with a child on social skills development,
Right.
your mission might be to help them interact appropriately with their peers.
So it's about keeping that big picture in mind rather than getting lost in all the little details.
Precisely. And that's where job mission statements come in. Each role within an organization, whether it's a therapist, a teacher, or a BCBA supervisor, should have a specific mission that contributes to that overall bigger picture.
So it's like everyone's working together towards a common goal, but each person has their own unique piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. When everyone understands their role and how it fits into the grand scheme, it creates a much more unified and purposeful approach.
So how do we know if our mission statement is actually a good one? The book mentions something called the ACORN test, right?
Oh yeah, the ACORN test is a great tool. It's a 5-criteria evaluation to see if a potential mission statement really holds up. It stands for accomplishment control, overall, objective reconcilable, and numbers. Each one of those is super important for making sure your mission statement is clear, actionable, and meaningful.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Let's break down each of those criteria.
Yeah.
Starting with accomplishment, what does that mean in the context of a mission statement?
Well, accomplishment simply means that your mission statement should focus on a result, not a behavior.
Okay, so like the outcome we're aiming for, not the specific actions we take to get there.
Exactly. For example, improving a client's communication skills, that's a result. Implementing a communication intervention, that's a behavior.
Got it. So the mission statement is all about that ultimate goal we're trying to achieve.
Precisely.
Now, what about control? That one sounds like it could be a bit tricky.
It is arguably the most crucial criterion. You see, control means that the person or team responsible for achieving that mission needs to have actual influence over the outcome. If it's something that's largely determined by external factors, well, then it's not a valid mission.
So it's about setting realistic expectations based on what someone can actually control?
Exactly. You can't hold someone accountable for something they have no power to change.
Makes sense. For example, if a teacher's mission is to improve student test scores, but those scores are heavily influenced by things like socioeconomic background.
Exactly. That wouldn't pass the control test because the teacher has limited influence over those external factors.
This concept could save a lot of frustration in the workplace, I think.
Absolutely. It's about setting people up for success.
Okay, that's 2 down. What about overall objective? How does that play into a good mission statement?
Good question. The overall objective criterion asks if the mission statement really encompasses the most important result. If you achieve that objective but other crucial outcomes are still missing, then it might not be a true overall objective.
So it's like making sure your mission statement is comprehensive enough to cover all the bases.
Right. It should represent the primary focus, the overarching goal, not just one small piece of the puzzle.
All right, we're on a roll.
Yeah.
2 more to go.
Yeah.
How about reconcilable? What's that all about?
Okay, so reconcilable means that your mission statement shouldn't clash with other job requirements or missions within the organization. It's about making sure everyone's efforts are aligned and working towards that shared vision.
So no conflicting goals or working at cross purposes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine a marketing team whose mission is to generate leads, but the sales team's mission is to close deals. If those aren't reconciled, you might end up with a ton of leads that never convert into actual customers.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
Right. It highlights the importance of communication and collaboration across different departments.
Absolutely. Okay, last but not least, we have numbers. This one sounds pretty straightforward.
It is pretty simple. This criterion just means that the mission statement has to be measurable in a practical way. You need to be able to track your progress and know if you're actually making a difference.
So it's about having concrete data to show that we're moving in the right direction.
Precisely. Without measurable outcomes, it's tough to know if your efforts are truly effective.
Okay, so we've covered all 5 criteria of the ACORN test. That was super helpful. But how do we actually apply this in real-world ABA settings?
Great question. Let's take an example of a BCBA working with a client who engages in self-injurious behavior.
Okay.
Before jumping into an intervention, it's crucial to pinpoint those specific behaviors and the desired outcome. So instead of a vague mission like reduce self-injury,
Right.
we might pinpoint a more specific mission like increase the client's use of functional communication to request breaks when they're feeling overwhelmed.
That's a much clearer and more targeted mission.
Exactly. And by using the ACORN test, we can ensure that this mission is actually focusing on a result the client has control over. It represents the overall objective. It's reconcilable with other treatment goals, and it's measurable.
I love how pinpointing helps us get so specific and really target the behavior that will lead to the most meaningful change for the client.
Absolutely. It's about making sure our efforts are laser focused.
This has been so helpful. I feel like I have a much better grasp on how to define a clear mission using the ACORN test.
Awesome.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of defining a really clear mission, but now let's get into the nitty-gritty of pinpointing. Should we be focusing on changing behaviors or results?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It can definitely be tricky.
It can, and I think it's something a lot of ABA professionals struggle with.
Well, the good news is the book gives us some really helpful guidelines. It outlines specific scenarios where it makes more sense to emphasize one over the other.
Okay, I'm all ears. When would we want to zero in on behaviors?
Well, one scenario is when the current performance is nowhere near the desired result. Like when you're teaching someone a brand new skill.
Right, you wouldn't expect them to just nail it right off the bat.
Exactly. You got to break it down into smaller steps, reinforce those initial efforts.
And that's where focusing on behaviors is so important. It helps keep the learner motivated, and you're shaping the behavior gradually over time.
Absolutely. And this applies to so many situations in ABA, right? Whether we're teaching communication skills, social skills, or even just daily living skills, breaking things down and reinforcing those small wins is crucial.
For sure. And it's not just about teaching new skills either. Sometimes we need to focus on behaviors when the link between the behavior and the result isn't immediately obvious.
That's a great point. Sometimes the connection is more indirect or long-term.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure, think about data collection. We all know it's important, but the act of meticulously recording data might not directly impact the client's progress in that exact moment.
Right, it's more about those long-term benefits.
Exactly. The data helps us make better decisions about treatment down the line. So even though that connection isn't always apparent right away, it's super important to reinforce that behavior of data collection to ensure we're getting those long-term gains.
It's a good reminder to appreciate those behind-the-scenes efforts that might not always get the recognition they deserve.
For sure. And another scenario where we might focus on behaviors is when the result we're aiming for is delayed. Something that takes a long time to achieve.
Yeah, like those long-term goals we often work on in ABA, increasing independence, preparing for a transition, those kinds of things.
Exactly. Those goals can take months or even years to fully realize.
It can be easy to lose sight of the progress when the results aren't immediate.
Right. And that's why it's so important to focus on the day-to-day behaviors that contribute to that long-term vision. So if you're working with a teenager on, transitioning to independent living,
Yeah.
You'd reinforce their efforts to complete chores, manage their time, advocate for their needs, even if full independence is still a while away.
It's all about building those essential skills and habits that will eventually lead to that bigger outcome.
Precisely.
No.
Okay, so another scenario where behaviors are super important is when we're dealing with those socially sensitive behaviors, things like personal hygiene, communication style, interpersonal skills.
And those can be tough to address sometimes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Especially without making people feel uncomfortable.
Oh, for sure. It's a delicate balance.
It is. But if these behaviors are impacting someone's relationships or, their ability to function in their daily life, we really need to address them.
You're absolutely right. And it's about reinforcing those positive changes as they happen. Sometimes people miss out on opportunities, not because they lack technical skills, but because of those unaddressed social behaviors.
That's such an important point. We need to look at the whole person and how those social and emotional aspects can really impact their lives.
Absolutely. And the final scenario where focusing on behaviors is key is when the poor results are due to things outside the performer's control.
So like external factors, unexpected setbacks, systemic barriers, those kinds of things.
Exactly. In those cases, it wouldn't be fair or effective to punish someone for not reaching a goal when they really don't have much control over the outcome.
Right. It's about recognizing their effort and resilience, even in the face of those challenges.
And focusing on reinforcing the behaviors they can control, even if those results are harder to achieve.
This whole discussion on behaviors has been so eye-opening. It really shows the complexity of performance management and how we need to go beyond just looking at those end results.
I couldn't agree more. It's about understanding the context, recognizing effort, and fostering growth.
Okay, so we've talked about 5 scenarios where focusing on behaviors is crucial. Now let's switch gears. When does it make more sense to shift our focus to those results?
Okay, so there are 3 main scenarios where emphasizing results can be a more effective strategy.
Lay it on me.
All right, so the first scenario is when the individuals involved are already highly skilled. They've mastered the necessary behaviors.
So like experienced professionals, people who have a proven track record.
Exactly. In those cases, constantly monitoring their every move might be counterproductive. You want to give them the autonomy and trust to do their thing.
It's like trusting a master chef to create a culinary masterpiece.
Mhm.
You wouldn't stand over their shoulder dictating every single step, would you?
Nope. And that brings us to the second scenario, where focusing on results is appropriate when the link between the behavior and the result is crystal clear.
So it's like a direct cause and effect relationship.
Exactly. Like if a behavior technician is teaching a client to tie their shoes, the steps are straightforward, the outcome is easily observable. So if the client can tie their shoes independently, they've got it.
No need to overcomplicate things in those situations.
Right. And the third scenario, where results often take center stage, is when you're already seeing those results improve.
So if things are trending in a positive direction, we can keep reinforcing that progress.
Absolutely. It indicates that the individuals are doing what they need to do and achieving those desired outcomes. You still want to monitor behaviors periodically, but the main focus can be on celebrating those wins and recognizing the progress being made.
It sounds like finding that balance between behaviors and results is a key skill for any ABA professional.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about knowing when to zoom in on the details and when to step back and look at the bigger picture.
Okay, this has been super helpful. I feel like I have a much clearer understanding of pinpointing. But before we move on, the book briefly mentions something called work sampling. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Oh, yeah. Work sampling is basically direct observation of performance in the workplace. It's a way for supervisors to get a firsthand look at how things are actually being done and identify any areas for improvement.
So it's like the supervisor going out on the floor and observing their team in action.
Exactly. And it serves a few important purposes. One, it helps supervisors see how well the organizational structure is working. They're looking at things like communication flow processes, how different teams interact.
So they're getting a sense of whether the systems in place are actually supporting performance or hindering it.
Precisely. They're trying to identify any bottlenecks or inefficiencies that might be impacting productivity or morale.
That makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
Okay, what else does work sampling tell us?
Well, it also helps supervisors evaluate their own management process. They're observing how their direct reports are managing their teams, providing feedback, creating a positive work environment.
So they're looking for things like clear communication, effective delegation, a focus on reinforcement, those sorts of things.
Exactly. And the book really stresses that the goal of work sampling isn't to micromanage or find fault. It's about identifying areas where supervisors can provide support and coaching.
Right. It's about being a collaborative leader, not a punitive one.
Absolutely. And when it's done well, work sampling can actually strengthen the supervisor's position.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, when a supervisor observes their team, it's important to reinforce positive behaviors through that supervisor rather than going directly to the individual employees.
Ah, I see. So it's about respecting the chain of command and reinforcing the supervisor's role as the primary source of feedback.
Exactly. And if corrections need to be made, it's best to address those privately with the supervisor rather than, publicly undermining their authority. It's about building trust and empowering supervisors to lead their teams effectively.
Makes sense. It sounds like work sampling can be a really powerful tool for improving performance at all levels of an organization.
It definitely can be. But remember, it only works if it's done consistently and with a focus on positive reinforcement.
Right? It's about catching people doing things right and acknowledging their efforts.
Exactly. You want to create a culture of continuous improvement where everyone feels supported and valued.
Well, this whole discussion has been incredibly helpful, and I'm excited to start putting these pinpointing concepts into practice. What are some final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with before we wrap up?
I think the main takeaway is that pinpointing isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. As ABA professionals, we need to be constantly evaluating our missions, identifying those critical behaviors and results, and adjusting our approach as needed. And remember, pinpointing isn't just about achieving outcomes. It's about creating a positive and supportive environment where everyone feels motivated to do their best.
That's a great reminder. And pinpointing isn't just for our professional lives either, right? We can use these same principles for our personal goals too.
Absolutely. Whether you're trying to improve your fitness routine, learn a new language, or just be more present in your daily life, pinpointing can help you focus on those key behaviors that will get you where you want to be.
That's like giving ourselves that extra boost of accountability, right?
Exactly. And just like in our professional work, we need to define that clear mission, identify the crucial behaviors, and then track our progress.
So let's say my mission is to be more mindful in my daily life. I could pinpoint specific behaviors, like taking a few deep breaths before reacting to a stressful situation, or maybe setting aside some time for meditation each day.
Perfect examples. By zeroing in on those specific actions, you're much more likely to actually see a difference in your overall mindfulness.
This has been such a fantastic discussion, and I really hope our listeners are feeling inspired to take a closer look at how they're using pinpointing both at work and in their personal lives. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap things up?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that pinpointing can be tough sometimes. Even with all the tools and techniques we've talked about, it can be hard to know where to start or, we get pulled in different directions.
That's so true. It's like we need to pinpoint our pinpointing skills.
There you go. It's
Yeah.
a never-ending process, right? But the key is to keep learning to refine our approach and never be afraid to reach out for support, whether it's from a mentor, a supervisor, or a trusted colleague.
Couldn't agree more. Collaboration is key. Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into pinpointing. We hope you enjoyed this episode of ABA Chapter Chat. And remember, the power to create real change starts with identifying those critical behaviors and results. So go out there and pinpoint like a pro. And be sure to join us next time for another exciting exploration of ABA concepts.
Until then, keep learning, keep growing.
We will see you all soon.